It was a rainy Saturday evening in Durham, North Carolina, when the front doors of the Central Police Precinct swung open. The officer at the desk looked up from his report, expecting another late-night drunk or some minor domestic dispute. But instead, a teenage girl entered, drenched in mist, her hoodie clinging to her thin frame. Her eyes were red, not from crying, but from something deeper, more haunting. She held tightly onto the hand of a woman beside her, her mother, pale and visibly shaken. "I need to speak to a detective," the girl said. The officer blinked, took a moment, then waved her through. They sat her down in an interview room. She didn't ask for a lawyer. She didn't look like she was about to tell a lie. Her voice didn't tremble. Her tone was flat. And her first words were, "I killed someone." The room went silent. The attending detective, a 12-year veteran named Laura Mendez, narrowed her eyes. "Who did you kill?" The girl looked straight ahead. "Her name was Emily Rowe." Mendez froze for a moment. That name, it wasn't unfamiliar. Emily Rowe had been listed as a missing person, last seen 3 weeks ago. A high school junior. No leads. No suspects. Just vanished without a trace. "You're saying you killed her?" Mendez asked. "Yes." "How?" "I stabbed her. Then my boyfriend strangled her." "Why?" The girl's answer sent a chill through the room. "She insulted me in a chat room." Mendez leaned forward. "You killed someone because of an online fight?" The girl nodded once. As if she were stating a fact, not confessing to murder. "Where is her body?" The girl hesitated only a second. "Storm Ridge. At the cliff. Past the State Road turnoff, behind the water tower. We threw her down." Storm Ridge. A remote stretch of wilderness west of the city, known mostly to hikers and survivalists. Hard to reach even with a 4x4. No buses went that way. There were no campsites, no trails. Just woods and rock and silence. "How did you get there?" Mendez asked, half disbelieving. "We took a taxi." "A taxi?" Mendez's voice rose, incredulous. "You got a cab to take you into the woods?" She nodded again. "He didn't go all the way. We walked the last part." The room fell into a tense stillness. Mendez glanced at the other officers watching behind the two-way mirror. No one said anything. No one needed to. This wasn't some drugged-out delusion. The girl, Molly Kessler, age 17, was lucid, rational, and clearly burdened by something very real. Mendez took a slow breath. "Why are you telling us this now?" Molly looked down at her hands. Her knuckles were white, gripping each other tight. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "She keeps coming back to me. Every night. I see her face. Hear her voice. I tried to forget. I really did." Then her tone dropped, as if revealing a secret she'd never meant to say aloud. "I went back to see her. A few nights ago. I wanted to make sure she was still there." "Still where?" "At the cliff. Where we left her." Mendez's heart thudded. "You went back to the body?" Molly nodded. "It was hot. July heat. She was falling apart. Her arms were twisted. There were bugs. So many. I didn't think it would be like that." Tears began to well in the corners of her eyes now, but her voice never cracked. "I thought, if I told someone, maybe she'd stop looking at me." Mendez leaned back. A few minutes later, the room cleared. A search unit was dispatched to Storm Ridge at dawn. They didn't expect to find anything. Kids crave attention. But by midday, the team radioed in. They'd found her. Emily Rowe. Her body was partially covered by undergrowth at the base of the cliff. Broken. Decomposed. But unmistakably human. And clearly, she hadn't simply fallen. The autopsy would confirm later that her ribs were cracked before the fall. There were blunt force wounds to the back of her skull, defensive wounds on her forearms, and a deep stab to the lower abdomen. Emily hadn't slipped. She had been murdered. Back at the station, Mendez returned to the room where Molly sat, now silent beside her mother. "We found the body," the detective said. Molly nodded slowly, almost like she expected it. "I told you I wasn't lying." Mendez studied the girl. "Why didn't you just say everything from the start? Who else was involved?" Molly shook her head. It was just me. But her eyes flicked down. The hesitation was too practiced. Mendez knew she was protecting someone. In that moment, a strange feeling crept up the detective's spine. Not fear. Not disgust. But something colder. This girl wasn't just broken. She had been made this way. And she wasn't alone. After Molly Kessler's chilling confession and the discovery of Emily Rowe's body, investigators knew one thing. There was more to the story. The details she had shared didn't add up, not logistically, not emotionally. A 17-year-old girl carrying out such a brutal murder, alone, in a remote location miles from any main road? The pieces didn't fit. So the department did what any seasoned detective would do. They looked deeper into Molly's life. What they found would disturb even the most hardened officers. Molly wasn't a typical teenager. She hadn't lived with her parents in over a year. Her school records showed sporadic attendance, and she had withdrawn from the public high school 6 months before the murder. Social workers had listed her as at risk, but she never entered the foster system. No follow-up. No welfare checks. Instead, Molly had vanished into a shadow community of teens who had dropped out of society altogether. This group, known among themselves as Family 41, was made up of runaway youth from different counties across North Carolina and Virginia. Most were between the ages of 15 and 18. They moved from motel to motel, lived out of cars, camped in parks, and used abandoned homes as shelter. But they weren't directionless. They had a leader, Molly. Her nickname in the group was Mother Mole. She wasn't the oldest, but she was the one people listened to. She organized rides, managed their phones, and kept track of money. But her power didn't come from fear or intimidation. It came from something more powerful, belonging. Every single member of Family 41 came from trauma, abuse, neglect, addiction, or poverty. For most, the group wasn't just a hideout. It was the only place where someone remembered their name, where someone would bring them soup when they were sick or defend them in a fight. Molly wasn't just a friend. She was their glue, their protector, their surrogate family. Among the members were 6 key individuals that law enforcement would later identify as complicit in the events surrounding Emily's death. Tyson Graves, 18, a lanky, wiry teen with a haunted look. Former foster child. Reportedly quiet, but violent when provoked. Danny Mitchell, 16, non-binary teen who had been kicked out of their home after coming out. Quick thinker. Always watching. Lacey Bright, 17, a former straight-A student who started living on the streets after her mother's overdose. Noah Reyes, 17, soft-spoken, clever, but emotionally volatile. Had been in and out of juvenile detention. Nina James, 16, the group's tech brain. Known for handling burner phones and setting up fake IDs. And Emmett Dalton, 21, the only adult in the group. Former truck driver with a record for transporting under-the-table goods across state lines. They weren't gang members. They didn't sell drugs or carry guns. But they were part of a closed ecosystem, one that operated outside the law, guided by its own code, loyalty above all. That code was exactly why Molly refused to name anyone at first. She would rather go to prison than betray her family. Detective Laura Mendez began piecing together their movements using digital footprints, texts, GPS data, chat logs. The breakthrough came from one of Molly's old burner phones. Recovered from her locker at an abandoned motel on Highway 54, it contained over 2,000 encrypted messages across multiple platforms. Most were benign: food pickups, meetup locations, reminders to stay off certain streets when patrols were high. But buried in a chat group called The Nest, Mendez found a conversation from the night of June 27th. Lacey, you sure she's coming? Noah, yeah. Told her it's just us two. She said she's down. Tyson, let's not mess this up. Molly, she wants to play games. Let's show her who she's dealing with. There was proof of premeditation. Even more chilling was the tone. Not rage, not panic, but casual agreement, like planning a party or a prank. When confronted with the transcripts, Molly finally broke her silence. She kept making me look weak. In front of my own people. I brought her in, and she took everything. Detective Mendez asked. So this was about power? Molly's voice wavered. It was about not being left behind again. As investigators dug deeper into the group's structure, they found something even more alarming. Money. Despite being homeless and unregistered, Family 41 had income streams. Emmett Dalton used his connections in long-haul trucking to land side gigs, moving goods that didn't always appear on manifests. Tyson and Noah helped load and unload. Danny and Lacey worked through Craigslist and underground apps doing odd jobs, sometimes cleaning houses, sometimes far darker tasks. Nina ran digital scams, stolen credit cards, fake Cash App transfers, even catfishing lonely men into Venmo donations. They lived frugally but earned thousands a month, which meant they could afford things most homeless youth couldn't: burner phones, hotel rooms, even legal consultations. And apparently, a taxi ride to Storm Ridge. Still, something about Molly's explanation felt incomplete. Yes, jealousy was part of it. Yes, she felt betrayed. But murder? Detective Mendez believed something darker was at play. Not just a reaction, but the performance. A violent act designed not to eliminate a rival, but to prove her worth, to show the group she still held the crown. In the absence of parents or mentors, Molly had created her own kingdom. And Emily Rowe? She had simply been a threat to the throne. In the end, Family 41 wasn't just a group of broken teenagers hiding from the world. They were a product of it, shaped by every adult who failed them, every system that looked the other way, every closed door that left them to fend for themselves. But none of that would undo what they did. And now, the entire house of cards was about to collapse. By the time investigators recovered the full message logs from Molly Kessler's encrypted chat accounts, they had already pieced together a rough timeline of Emily Rowe's disappearance. But what they didn't expect was just how quickly things had escalated. It wasn't weeks of tension. It wasn't some slow psychological breakdown. It was a digital spark. And it ignited like gasoline. June 27th, 10:38 p.m. Inside room 213 of the Red Fern Motel on the outskirts of Durham, 5 members of Family 41 had gathered. A busted Bluetooth speaker was blasting old-school rap while half-eaten convenience store sandwiches sat on the nightstand. In the corner, Tyson was fiddling with the burner phone router Nina had rigged together. And Molly? She was staring at her cracked smartphone screen, scrolling through the group chat they called The Nest. It was a private channel, accessible only by invitation. Half the users were teens like them. The other half were adults who paid for attention, companionship, or worse. The system wasn't new. Everyone in Family 41 knew the rules. Some nights, it paid their motel bill. Some nights, it paid for food. But that night, Emily Rowe was dominating the feed. At 11:02 p.m., Emily sent a photo. Just her lips, smiling. Followed by a message. You said you liked red lipstick. This okay? Within minutes, a flood of replies came in. Where you at tonight? Perfect. Worth every penny. And at the center of it all, Emily was responding with charm and warmth. Flirting. Joking. Controlling the rhythm of the conversation with ease. Molly watched, expressionless. No one mentioned her. No one asked for her. No one even reacted when she posted a new selfie 20 minutes later. Not a single response. That was when something in her shifted. At 11:31 p.m., Molly finally typed, "Be careful with Emily. She's not what you think." Someone replied with a laughing emoji. Another wrote, "Drama again?" Emily fired back almost immediately. "Really? You brought me here. And now you're doing this? You talk about money more than anyone. You act like you're some queen. It's exhausting." The room fell quiet. Even the motel's music faded to background noise. Molly stared at the screen. Her fingers were trembling, not from fear, but rage. "You think you can take my place? You're just a stray I let in. Keep pushing. See where it gets you." That last message came with a knife emoji. Mendez, the lead detective, would later remark, "That was the digital equivalent of someone loading a gun in front of you." What followed wasn't just a fight. It was an unraveling. Tyson asked what was going on. Lacey peeked over Molly's shoulder and saw the messages. Nina and Danny joined in. One by one, the group gathered around the phone like witnesses to a public betrayal. "She disrespected you," Tyson said. "In front of everyone," Lacey added. Molly didn't say much. She didn't have to. Tyson was already pacing. Danny started typing furiously. Plans were forming, not as direct orders, but as communal rage. Like they'd all just been humiliated together. By midnight, a plot had been formed. Lacey and Noah volunteered to lure Emily out. They knew she'd trust them. Emily wasn't afraid of Lacey. If anything, she looked up to her. Noah had always been sweet to her. They'd hung out, smoked weed behind the laundromat a week earlier. So they sent her a private message. "That thing earlier? It was stupid. Let's talk. Just us. No drama." Emily didn't reply right away. Then at 12:16 a.m. she answered. "Just don't bring Molly." Lacey responded with a heart emoji. Emily wasn't naive. But she wasn't paranoid either. She didn't realize the trap wasn't in the invite. It was in the silence. The other group members said nothing. The chat went cold. No one defended Molly. No one defended Emily. Everyone was waiting. Because once the message was sent, it was already done. At 3:47 a.m., Emily slipped out of the women's shelter where she'd been temporarily staying. The night guard didn't stop her. She left through the back, phone in hand, a hood over her head, heading to the edge of Westgate, the spot she was told to meet. Surveillance from a nearby auto shop caught her shadow walking across the lot. She looked calm. Even smiled once at her phone. She thought this was reconciliation. She thought these people, Molly's people, were her friends. Back at the motel, Molly sat cross-legged on the bed, a cheap folding blade resting in her lap. Her hands were calm now. Steady. Tyson was checking the van's gas tank. Lacey had already put her phone on airplane mode. And Danny? They were just finishing a message draft on another phone. Not to Emily, but to someone else. Another client. Another job. Because even in moments of violence, the business kept running. That was the coldest part. Later, under oath, Noah would say, "It didn't feel like we were planning to hurt her. It felt like we were protecting our own." But the messages said otherwise. The emojis. The jokes. The silence. They had chosen their side before anyone got in the van. Before the blade was drawn. Before Emily ever said goodbye to the world. It was 4:06 a.m. when Emily Rose stepped into the empty lot on the outskirts of Westgate. The pavement was still wet from a late-night drizzle, and a thin mist curled around the broken chain-link fence. She wore a gray hoodie and carried her phone loosely in one hand. Her messages were still open. The last one read, "It's just us. No drama. Come alone." Sent by Lacey Bright. Emily had hesitated. But not for long. She thought they were coming to apologize. She thought maybe Molly had cooled off. Maybe this was a misunderstanding. She thought she still had friends. She didn't know the van was already parked a block away, engine idling. A gas station security camera across the street captured the scene, blurry, barely visible under the flickering orange streetlight. At 4:10 a.m., a white 1997 Dodge Caravan rolled into view. The back door slid open before the vehicle even stopped. Emily turned just in time to see Tyson Graves leap from the passenger seat. Danny Mitchell followed, eyes sharp, jaw set. Behind them was Molly, silent, unreadable. Emily stepped back instinctively. "Wait, what's going on?" Nobody answered. Instead, Tyson lunged. He grabbed her by the arm and yanked her forward, hard enough to spin her sideways. Her phone flew out of her hand and hit the pavement with a crack. She screamed, loud, piercing, desperate, but within seconds, a rough towel was shoved into her mouth. Emily kicked and thrashed. She was strong. She was terrified. And she was outnumbered. They forced her into the van. Tyson slammed the door shut as she tried to scramble out. Danny pinned her legs. Molly sat beside her, watching, breathing heavy, not speaking. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled. The van pulled away, no headlights, no horn. Just silence and the hum of vengeance. Emily tried again at the toll plaza on I-85. The van slowed briefly as it approached the booth. She thrashed harder, managed to pull the towel halfway from her mouth. Her muffled scream escaped in fragments. "Please, help please." The toll worker never heard it. The music was too loud. The windows were tinted. And the van didn't stop. Later, when police retrieved the booth footage, they could see Emily's hand in the back window, pressing hard against the glass. It was the last time she was seen alive in public. Inside the van, things turned cruel. Tyson was the first to strike, punching her hard in the ribs. Emily doubled over. Danny kicked her knees. Lacey screamed for them to stop, but didn't move. Noah, seated in the back, just stared at his hands. And Molly? She finally spoke. "Tell me again what you said about me." Emily, blood pooling at her lips, gasped, "I didn't mean it." Molly pulled out a box cutter. Silver. Stained at the hinge from rust. She knelt beside Emily, locked eyes with her for a long second, and drove the blade into her stomach. Emily arched back in agony, muffled by the towel jammed between her teeth. She tried to scream. She tried to breathe. But nobody stopped Molly. Not even when she stabbed again. And again. Later, when interrogated, Tyson would say, she wasn't screaming anymore. Just twitching. At that point, even the group grew uneasy. But it was too late to turn back. At 4:49 a.m., the van veered off the highway and turned onto an unpaved trail into Storm Ridge, a dense forest with no streetlights, no cell service, and no patrols. The van rocked over rocks and branches until it reached the edge of a drop-off, an overgrown cliff about 30 feet high. They dragged Emily out. She was barely conscious. Her shirt was soaked in blood. Her mouth was gagged. Her eyes were still open, but distant, clouded over. Molly couldn't look at her. So she turned away. Tyson didn't. He wrapped his arms around Emily's neck from behind, pulled tight, and held it. She didn't fight. She couldn't. "I felt her spine crack," he would later tell police. "I didn't know it'd feel like that." They dropped the body down the cliff like trash. No words. No ceremony. Just a thud in the dark. Then, as if nothing had happened, they got back in the van. And drove off. What disturbed detectives most about this part of the case wasn't the violence. It was the silence. How quiet the crime had been. How clean. How everyone knew their part. How no one raised their voice. How even those who didn't strike, didn't stop it. That's what made it terrifying. This wasn't a chaotic explosion of rage. It was cold. Coordinated. Calculated. Back at the motel that morning, Lacey cried in the shower. Danny deleted their texts. Tyson cleaned the blood off his boots. Molly sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her hands for nearly 30 minutes. She never spoke a word. But every night after that, she would wake up screaming. And every scream ended with the same name. Emily. For 12 days after Emily's murder, Molly Kessler didn't say a word about it. Not to her group. Not to her mother. Not even to herself. It was as if she'd buried the truth alongside Emily's body in the ravine at Storm Ridge. But unlike the dirt and moss that covered Emily, Molly's guilt never stayed buried. It came back, every night. In the beginning, she pretended nothing had changed. She returned with the others to the Red Fern Motel, took a shower, ate leftover chips, and curled up on the mattress near the AC unit like always. Nobody talked about the cliff. Nobody even looked at each other. They didn't need to. Their silence was an unspoken pact. A dark glue that held their fractured family together. But Molly's nights grew longer. Her eyes refused to close. And when they did, they reopened in the forest. In her dreams, Emily didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stared. Silent. Accusing. On the 6th night, Molly woke up gasping. The clock said 3:04 a.m. She had scratched her own neck in her sleep. Red welts trailed under her collarbone. The sound of snapping bone from Tyson's chokehold had looped in her ears like a song she couldn't forget. I felt her spine crack. She remembered those words. She wished she didn't. By day 9, she started mumbling to herself. Danny noticed first. Molly would sit in the corner of the motel room, whispering under her breath like she was praying or arguing with someone invisible. I didn't want to. I didn't mean it. She looked at me like that. I should have stopped him. Tyson tried to shake her out of it. "Hey, get your shit together." But Molly didn't respond. She stared at the wall like she was waiting for it to bleed. On the 10th day, she walked out without telling anyone. No phone. No wallet. Just a backpack with a bottle of water, a dull box cutter, and an old hoodie that still smelled like motel detergent. She hitchhiked. She lied to a gas station clerk, saying she was trying to find her dog. She told a trucker she needed a ride to visit her sister. By the time she reached the dirt trail leading into Storm Ridge, the sun was setting. The woods were dead quiet. No wind. No birds. Just the sound of her own footsteps crunching over dried pine needles and gravel. She reached the cliff by instinct, not memory. Every detail returned with vicious clarity. The exact curve in the path where the van had parked. The flattened grass where they had dragged Emily's body out. The moss-covered ledge they had stood on before letting her fall. It was all there. Nature had not reclaimed it. Not yet. Molly sat at the cliff's edge for nearly an hour. The sun dipped behind the trees, casting a golden light across the rocks below. She could smell decay in the wind. Not strong. Just enough to confirm what she came to see. Emily was still there. Molly leaned over, carefully, until she could glimpse what lay below. Even in partial shadow, the sight made her retch. Emily's body had shifted from rainfall, her limbs twisted further, skin bloated and torn. Bugs crawled across her cheek. Her shirt was stained maroon. Her mouth, still gagged with the same towel, was frozen open in a grotesque half-scream. But her eyes, they were gone. Eaten or sunken, Molly didn't know. But she imagined them still staring. She fell backward, gasping, scraping her palms on gravel. And she began to cry. Really cry. For the first time since it happened. Not the controlled sniffles of grief, but deep, guttural sobs that shook her body and made her chest heave. She cried until her face was raw and her hands were numb. Then she sat up, trembling. And she whispered to the wind, "I'm sorry. I didn't know it would be like this. You were supposed to get up." The next morning, she took the 6:15 a.m. bus heading back into Durham. She didn't go to the motel. She didn't go to her group. She went home. For the first time in over a year. Her mother, Rachel Kessler, was shocked to see her standing at the door, hair tangled, clothes muddy, eyes vacant. She didn't ask where Molly had been. She just opened the door. And Molly walked in. They sat in silence at the kitchen table. Molly stared at the bowl of cereal her mother had placed in front of her but didn't eat. After 20 minutes, she whispered, "I did something." Her mother didn't interrupt. "It's about that girl. The one who went missing. Emily." She paused. Then finally, "She's dead." Rachel flinched. "Did you see it happen?" Molly shook her head slowly. "I was there. I was the reason." And then the whole story came out, halting, fragmented but raw. From the chat room fight, to the van, to the cliff. Rachel didn't speak. But she cried quietly as her daughter described everything. And when Molly finished, she stood up and said the last words of her freedom. "We have to go to the police now." At 10:47 a.m., on July 12th, Molly Kessler walked into the Durham Police Department, holding her mother's hand tightly. She didn't wear makeup. She didn't bring a lawyer. She didn't hesitate. The first thing she said to the officer at the desk was, "I killed someone." When the news broke that Molly Kessler had turned herself in, the reaction inside Family 41 was not rage. It was fear. Real, paralyzing fear. Tyson was the first to hear. He'd been sleeping in the back seat of the van, parked 2 blocks from the Redfern Motel, when Danny burst in holding a prepaid phone. "She talked," they said. "She went to the cops." For a long moment, Tyson just stared at the floor. He didn't ask what Molly said. He didn't have to. They all knew what she'd seen. What she'd done. What they'd all done. By 11 a.m., local news outlets had picked up the story. Teen girl confesses to murder in missing student case. The name Emily Rowe was everywhere. Her school photo appeared on every screen, eyes bright, hair curled perfectly for picture day. Then came the photo of Molly being escorted into the Durham precinct, flanked by 2 detectives. No handcuffs. No resistance. Just a girl with hollow eyes. The motel room where the rest of Family 41 had regrouped turned into a pressure cooker. Tyson paced. Lacey cried. Danny sat against the wall, scrolling endlessly through news updates. What do we do? Noah whispered. No one answered. Because deep down they already knew. It was over. The group had always clung to the idea of invincibility. No records, no parents, no paper trail. They moved like ghosts between shelters, motels, and back roads. They shared everything: food, money, cigarettes, even passwords. But they had never factored in conscience. They never planned for one of their own to break. By nightfall, Lacey was gone. She left a note scribbled on a napkin. I didn't touch her. I didn't stop it either. I'm sorry. Tyson found it on the nightstand. He didn't tell the others. The next morning, something even more unexpected happened. Danny Mitchell, age 16, and Noah Reyes, age 17, walked into the Durham police station on their own. They didn't come with lawyers. They didn't wait for warrants. They just asked to speak with Detective Mendez. We were there, Danny said. We didn't kill her, Noah added, voice shaking, but we didn't stop it either. Mendez had been expecting something like this. She'd dealt with broken alliances before. But she was struck by how young they looked. How scared. Danny kept fidgeting with their sleeves. Noah couldn't meet anyone's eyes. Both sat like statues under the weight of their own silence finally lifted. When asked why they came forward, Danny said, Molly took the first hit. She did what none of us could. If she's going down for it, I'm not letting her go alone. In the days that followed, more dominoes fell. Lacey turned herself in from a youth shelter in Chapel Hill. Nina James, the hacker of the group, was tracked down through her signal. She didn't resist arrest. Each of them had a story, a reason, a breakdown moment. For Lacey, it was a recurring nightmare, Emily whispering her name from under the bed. For Noah, it was the way Molly had looked at him that night after the killing, not with hate but pity. And for Danny, it was the simple realization. We were never a family. We were scared kids pretending not to be scared. Only two remained silent. Tyson Graves, the boy who ended Emily's life with his bare hands. And Emmett Dalton, the 21-year-old adult who had driven the van and supplied the means of escape. Both vanished. But not for long. Police caught Tyson first, hiding out in an abandoned trailer near Burlington, armed with a knife and a survival bag. He didn't fight. He didn't speak. When cuffed, he looked directly at the arresting officer and asked, Is she still down there? They knew exactly who he meant. Emmett was harder to find. He'd fled across state lines to Tennessee, using an alias, sleeping in truck cabs, exchanging labor for gas money. But the security camera at a rest stop caught his plate. He was arrested 3 days later. His reaction? He laughed. Not out of amusement, but like someone who had lost everything long ago. That girl never stood a chance, he muttered. She walked right into the lion's den. With all 7 members of Family 41 in custody, the justice system now faced a question. How do you prosecute teenagers who killed not out of cold calculation, but out of loyalty to each other? How do you measure guilt in a world where everyone is both victim and perpetrator? Molly's case was treated differently. She confessed. She led the search team to the body. She showed remorse. But none of that could undo what she had done. Emily Rowe was still dead. Her parents would never see her graduate, never hear her laugh again. 100 apologies wouldn't bring her back. The court decided to try Emmett and Tyson as adults. Tyson, who delivered the fatal chokehold, was charged with second-degree murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit assault. Emmett, the adult facilitator, was charged with murder as a party to the crime, transporting a minor for criminal purposes, and accessory after the fact. The remaining minors, including Molly, Danny, Lacey, Noah, and Nina, were routed through juvenile court, with the possibility of transfer to adult court depending on further evaluation. In her final interview before trial, Molly told the detective, "I thought they were my family. I thought that meant protecting them, even if it meant destroying someone else." She paused, then added, "But families don't ask you to kill for them." The courtroom was full the day Molly Kessler stood trial. Not with spectators, but with silence. It wasn't the kind of silence born from awe. It was the kind that wrapped around the walls like fog, heavy, cold, and impossible to breathe through. Parents of students from Durham High School sat in the gallery, clutching tissues. Teachers. Journalists. A handful of kids who used to know Molly, Emily, even Tyson. But none of them looked at her. And Molly never looked up. The prosecution painted the murder as premeditated and brutal. Emily Rowe was lured, beaten, stabbed, and strangled, the district attorney said. Not by strangers, but by people who called themselves her family. Photos of Emily's final resting place were shown: the jagged cliff edge, the blood-stained shirt, the broken jaw, the gag. The smell had taken 3 officers days to forget. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't even a fight gone wrong. This was punishment. Revenge. Molly's defense attorney didn't argue innocence. There was no point. Instead, she argued context. Molly Kessler grew up abandoned. Physically abused by her stepfather. Forgotten by the system. She didn't wake up one day and decide to be a killer. She fell into a world where violence was currency and loyalty was demanded at all costs. She described the structure of Family 41. The emotional dependency, the control, the fear of being replaced, exiled, or worse, forgotten. When Molly watched Emily take her place, it wasn't jealousy she felt. It was terror. She was losing the only home she'd ever known. But even her lawyer's voice cracked at the end. Because nothing, not trauma, not manipulation, not desperation, could undo what had been done. Emily Rowe's mother took the stand on the 3rd day. Her voice was soft, controlled. My daughter was kind, gentle. She believed in people too easily. She thought if someone was hurting, they just needed a friend. She paused, holding up a small silver bracelet. This was Emily's. She wore it every day. They found it in the dirt near the cliff. Fresh. Still on her wrist. Her eyes turned toward Molly for the first time. I hope you never forget the sound of her voice. I hope you remember it louder than your own. The court made its decision in October. Molly Kessler, the ringleader, was sentenced to 13 years in prison for second-degree murder and kidnapping. Tyson Graves, who delivered the fatal chokehold, received 10 years. Emmett Dalton, the adult who facilitated the act, received 13 years for his role in transportation and conspiracy. All 3 appealed. All 3 were denied. The remaining members of Family 41, Danny, Noah, Lacey, and Nina, were tried as juveniles. Psychological evaluations showed deep-rooted trauma, neglect, and a severe lack of moral foundation. But none had delivered fatal blows. None had led the plot. They were sentenced to intermediate reform school until the age of 21, with the possibility of early release based on behavior and rehabilitation progress. But even with the legal part over, the echoes remained. At Durham High School, a memorial bench was placed under the old oak tree Emily used to sit beneath. Students would leave notes on folded paper. I wish we had protected you. You deserved better. I still hear your laugh in the halls. In online forums, debates raged for weeks. Was Molly a murderer or a victim of her environment? Should Tyson have received more time? Was justice even possible when a life was lost so senselessly? But no answer satisfied anyone. In prison, Molly rarely spoke. She spent her days reading books from the library and writing letters no one received. Every year on June 27th, the anniversary of Emily's death, she refused meals and sat alone in her cell. No one knew if she was mourning, punishing herself, or trying to feel something. She never requested parole. Not once. Detective Laura Mendez, who led the investigation, retired 2 years later. In an interview, she was asked what case stayed with her most. She didn't hesitate. Emily Rowe. Because it was the first time I realized that some murders aren't about hate. They're about fear. About broken kids trying to build a home with broken bricks. She paused. And in the end it all collapsed. There were no heroes in the story of Family 41. Only wounds. And the quiet hope that somewhere, in some better version of the world, a girl like Emily wouldn't have to learn the hard way who her real friends were.